Right, thank you very much. And now it's time for our third speaker in this session, Professor Elżbieta Tabakowska. Professor Elżbieta Tabakowska is Professor Emerita at the Jagiellonian University in Kraków and Poland, and she specializes in cognitive linguistics and translation studies. She's the founder of the UNESCO Chair for Translation Studies and Intercultural Communication at the Jagiellonian University. Professor Tabakowska is also a practicing interpreter and translator. Between 2007 and 2008, she acted as a European Union expert for the development of standard MA program in translation studies. So, Professor Tabakowska, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. Now, as of yesterday, I have sort of marked my presence here as a translator of Alice in Wonderland, thanks to the great publicity, but in fact this is not what I do. I am a linguist and a translator, and if I translate, it is not nice things like Alice in Wonderland. It is historical narrative, and it is about historical narrative that I intend to speak today. Right, here are my two mottos. Number one is a sentence by Cladenius, who was a 17th century historian, and I think it sums up nicely what we've said so far since yesterday. Then my second motto is an African proverb which I think pertains and applies nicely to doing historical narrative. Now, when I learned that I had 30 minutes to present my topic, I panicked because the amount of writing on historical writing is absolutely immense. Dealing with it from all possible points of view and in all possible perspectives, and there is no chance not only to present much of it, but even to read some of it. So it is as much as I could do, simply. At the beginning, I quote after Jan Pomorski, who has been specializing in writing on historical writing, and who in fact inspired this presentation. Now, there are two opposing views, and I gave you the red dates to show the time from which those two statements come. A German historian, Leopold von Ranke, said, "I wish that my own eye disappears completely. I wish that only matters might speak and powerful forces emerge." There is a point in my having chosen a German historian, and then I'll tell you later why I did that. Then, a Lutheran theologian and historian, Johann Martin Cladenius, said, "Wrong are those who require that a historiographer might appear to be a man without religion, without a homeland, without a family." These two opposing views are a sort of leitmotif of what I want to say today. Now, why then? That's it. Now, like translation in general, translation of historical narrative has usually been discussed from two opposing points of view. And the old opposition is that between historical writing and historical narrative translation as science, as art. The thing on the slide now is the juxtaposition between the crucial points belonging to each of those two attitudes. And so, science assumes that the subject matter would be objective, or as some say, real, the real, whilst the subject matter of art is considered to be speculative, meaning what is possible rather than real. Scrupulous objectivism is juxtaposed with art of interpretation or poetic imagination, which Jacob Burckhardt, another theorist of historical writing, said is filling in the gaps in observation. Then there is a crucial problem of truth. Truth is supposed to appear in non-literature, in scientific writing, whilst narrative, associated mostly with literary production, is considered to give us fiction. Now, whilst science reports, art narrates. The difference being between personal experience and experiments and so on, as opposed to indirect or less frequently direct evidence or meta-experience, as the writers call it. Then, science presents history as history, res gesta, as historians put it. Now, art would present history as relation, which is, sorry, scripte rerum gestarum, the description of facts. Now, science assesses, finds facts and gives assessment thereof, whilst art presents feelings, state of the soul, as one of the theorists nicely puts it, and reverberations of it we had yesterday, as you remember. Then, whilst science claims the right to discovery, art is invention. Now, Pomorski, looking for linguistic grammatical markers of both these stances, speaks about science using he, there, and then, which is distance from the narrator, whilst the attitude characterized as art has I, here, and now. I would claim further down that whilst the Polish historiography tries to keep to the left-hand side, tries to produce scientific discourse, British tradition, especially that of the 20th century, is in favor of the art attitude. Now, this is based both on the theoretical writing that I am familiar with, just a little part of it I managed to plow through. On the other hand, it's based on my experience as a translator. As of today, it's about 7,000 pages of historical narrative texts. And then I am lucky to know my editors, and they give me consecutive versions of the translations with all the interventions. And the interventions are, I think, interesting enough to make me believe that maybe they prove interesting to you as well. Okay? Right. Now, the main stance which I take as a translator of historical narrative goes by the name of perspectivism. And Pomorski says on the topic, unlike historians who are scientists, mark the inverted commas, historians who are perspectivists, mark the inverted commas again, question the possibility of writing history in the mirror convention, the convention that requires showing objective truth of past events. They accept the category of point of view as obligatory. And this is a crucial question I want to ask. Whose point of view it should, need, might, ought, will be? So far, so good. One of the classics, Hayden White, who is number one in this field, he talks about narrativism in historiography, and he mentions four main properties thereof: relativism, subjectivity of cognition, anthropological perspective, and cultural contexts. All of them have been covered in the discussions and presentations we had yesterday, so I don't think there's much point in dwelling upon it. I just move on. To find out how people understand the term narrative, I did a banal, simple thing. I Googled the term, and the dictionary.com says that a narrative is a story or account of events, experiences, or the like, whatever the like might be, and then whether true or fictitious. Now, the question arises at this junction: is there a narrative that is not historical? And my answer would be not really. The next question would be, is there a historical narrative that is not literature? And my answer would be, not really. Some are more literary than others. But there is this element of belles lettres in all of them. Hayden White says that writing history is a way of thinking about the past as specific literary artifact. And there is no reason not to believe somebody like Hayden White. Then Linda Hutchinson, who is also a theorist of historical writing, says that what historians produce are historiographic meta-novels. So my claim would be that history should be like literature. I say should be because in the Polish cultural tradition it clearly is not, which is to be proven, and I hope to be able to do so. Okay? Now, wait a minute. No. Where are we now? Come on. They always do that to me. Yeah, right. So now, let's have a brief look at historical narrative as literature. If history is indeed a construction of historical possible worlds, and if historical narrative is a meta-literature, the question of literacy arises. And I take as my starting point, and in fact as my lead in what I do myself, Edward Balthazar's theory that the resources themselves in literary and non-literary writing are more or less the same. because this is what the languages offer, a competent, rather competent language user. It is the combination of particular features which makes the distinctions between literary and non-literary genres, and what is decisive is the conscious use of features, so that the combination of elements selected becomes unique in much the same way as an idiolect is a particular combination of features, each of which is shared with a number of other speakers of language. If it is so, I would like you to have a look at the blue fragment of Davies's narrative. Oh, I forgot to tell you that all my examples come from books written by a prominent British contemporary historian, Norman Davies. And this comes from his Europe, and at some point he discusses Rococo, which he dislikes strongly. And he sums up the period by writing, silk, silver, and sumptuous sundries saturated the silence. This cannot be an incident. So here I am writing an email to my author, and I said, dear Norman, why did you do what you did? And then he says, dear Elżbieta, I do what I did because I hate Rococo, and apart from that, I was bored to death with my writing. Right? So he does it for two reasons: boredom with scholarly writing, and not quite conscious use of quantitative iconicity, which says the more of phonetic substance, the more of semantic signification. Right? This "s," which is associated, if you ask those people who do sound symbolism, with something not terribly pleasant, like spit. Right? The accumulation of the "s" sound shows his dislike, both for Rococo and for his own profession at times. Right? What does the translator do? That's just the point. If she does what she thought she should, which is looking for, I fear to use the word equivalence, because Theo Hermann says equivalence is dead, right? And he's right, in a sense. But when the translator does what she should, the editor puts 3 red exclamation mark on the margin and saying, now. Okay, now. Now, why shouldn't a narrative be a text of culture? Because at that point, at the Rococo thing, one has to ask herself, why does the editor protest? What's going on, for God's sake? Huh? And then we discover that historical narrative is in fact a text of culture. Once I suspected that it might be so, I again Googled culture text. And what Google says, you have on this particular slide with the link provided at the bottom. Right? A culture text is the most abstract model of reality. It represents the world view of a country. It adopts a universal point of view, and it inhabits a discrete space and has 2 features. Those characterizing the structure of the world, which is supposed to be immobile. Right? Remember historical ontology. And those characterizing the place, disposition and activity of man in the surrounding world, which is mobile and which provides the social-cultural context. So far, so good. Let's look at the first of those features, the model of reality. Now, the universal assumption concerning historical ontology is what could have happened and what is judged absolutely impossible. That is called semantic prefiguration. What is missing is judged by whom? Judged where? Judged when? Right? And those places of indeterminacy give you really a lot of trouble. Right? Now, then the principles are non-contradiction, spatio-temporal structuring. They have to have an origin and then development. And the two, origin or genesis and development, are considered to be main historiographic metaphors. Metaphors, conceptual metaphors. Right. And then there is this ubiquitous looking glass metaphor, which is still a prevailing paradigm, reflecting reality or showing what is again metaphorically called naked truth. Huh? Now, I should imagine that truth always wears an attire of sorts. Right? What is it then? What is truth? I found a lovely definition in one of my authors. Truth is the product of particular cultural practices. And I love this. And then you have something like historical truth, which is poetic imagination of the historian. And that also is fairly inspiring, I should imagine. Now, if you consider those two red truths, the question that you are bound to ask is what exactly is the relation between a fact and interpretation? Facts are open for direct experiencing. Historical facts are interpretation by definition. All recording is interpretation, as is translation. And the problematic thing is how to find the point, the border that separates interpretation from bending the narrative. Now, from my own practice, I believe that the border is fuzzy, to say the least. So far, so good. Now, if you remember, the next property of text of culture was that it should give a world view of a country. Who is it? Outsiders or insiders? Huh? Pomorski says that what is involved is a culture-specific projection of historical possible worlds, where we come across the juxtaposition of Saul Kripke and with his possible words, and all those people who do literary history and speak about represented worlds. Right? So, how does culture condition cognition? What is the role of tradition? And history writing, is it really communicating the way in which a community experiences the world? And how do we define community and communities? What are the proportions between the national history on the one hand and the global history on the other? What is the historical policy? Mind you, I do not intend to go into the contents of historical writing of contemporary problems. I am just a humble linguist, so I ask the question how, rather than the question what. But one has to look at the historical writing via the prism, the perspective of the prevailing notions of the country at a given moment. And today, the historical policy assumes the primacy of national history. This would certainly have to be reflected in the translation. And the tenets are like green here. All, presumably, all, or preferably, all Poles are heroes, and heroes are flawless, stainless, spotless. And this results in appearance in the lexicon of terms which will certainly appear in Polish historiography fairly soon, but which are brand new now. You talk about bohaterszczyzna. I don't know how it translates. The best I could think of was dead everywhere. Right? And this is the title of a performance which is not very well looked upon now. Bohaterszczyzna is heroism which means going against common sense in a way, right? Now, then there was the term Tupolewism. Tupolewism is the philosophy of people who investigate and believe in the bomb attempt as the reason of the famous plane crash at Smolensk. Finally, you have the żołnierze wyklęci, Polish underground soldiers, which resulted in a beautiful Polish word, przeżywca. Przeżywca was invented by one of the Polish journalists, and that's the person who managed to live through the Holocaust. Right? These three terms are just the prospective stumbling blocks of people who would be dealing with historical narrative Polish. For me, they are rather an aside, because I would like to talk about the universal POV, point of view, which is there, which isn't universal, and which isn't there at all. First of all, coalescence of varying points of view into unity of meaning is impossible by definition. And this, I think, is an obvious fact. Or, as the Polish parlance now has a oczywistość. The of courseness. Okay? Right. Different texts, and history texts in particular, speak with different authority. That's obvious. Hence the question, is there a historical narrative that is not culture and language specific? And here I positively answer no. Since we speak about texts, I wanted to ask myself the next question. How justified it is to treat historical narrative as object of linguistics? And, for Pomorski again, historical ontology has its roots in language, in which there are cultural matches used to conceptualize the picture of the world, he says, and I agree. Now, it is also interesting to observe that the cognitive turn, that is the turn towards narrativism in history, the thing I talked about before, is paralleled by what is called the second cognitivism in theory of language, as opposed to the first cognitivist turn of Chomsky et consortes, which said that investigating language is investigating the human mind. Now we would like to think that investigating language is investigating cognition, processes of cognition. And this is why the model proposed by Lanark, Kraków, Johnson, Turner, Fauconnier at Consortes agrees with what Pomorski at Consortes talk about when they speak about modern historiography. And the blue thing is my starting point for the second part. How much time do I have, Agnieszka?
I guess
what?
5 minutes.
Uh-oh. That's too bad. Now, the blue thing it shows you what my idea is. Historical matter is mediated by language, so the linguist and the translator or translation studies theorist can or should be legitimately involved. From now on, it's just fun, because it will be examples of proposals and interventions. Translation is based upon three assumptions. I base it on three assumptions. It is necessary to translate the world as subject of cognition into the language of the investigating culture, number one. Cultural imputation is the concept which I like most. I owe it to Wojciech Wrzosek, and he says that cultural imputation is reading the investigating culture into the culture which is subject to investigation, which means that the aim is to show not what things are or were, but what the original author believed they were like. Not were, but were like. And aside the question, when were they like this or that? When? Because the time of I, or the speaking I, does not overlap with the historical time. And when Davis writes, the voyages and discoveries came in a cluster thanks to the end of 7 years war end to recent technical advances. What does recent really mean? When is recent? Yeah? Now, in this connection, it's worth remembering the transcultural dialogue, and the name which comes to mind here is of the dear absent Piotr Blumczyński, who talked about cultural translation, and rightly so, which would imply cultural imputation twice removed. We have a version of a historian which is once removed because it's indirect observation, and then the translator repeats the procedure. What then are the results? I want to focus on the markers of the point of view, which, as you will, of course, remember, does not necessarily mean the appearance of the first person personal pronoun. And now just a handful of examples. Davis, an important mixed race class has evolved, and it is there now, meaning when. I say powstała, past tense. Powstała at the time that Davis wrote about it. My editor says istnieje, it exists. Now, once I asked Davis if his history would sound different if he wrote in a language which had not possessed present perfect. And he hasn't answered that question ever, not yet. But here you are. The point of view of my editor is entirely different from mine, from Davis's point of view. Now, same in number 3. I was aware, says Davis, from an early age that my freedom to roam the moors was a privilege that had not existed during my father's boyhood. He thought about this privilege there and then. Now, my editor imposes an objective view where the whole scene is seen in the removed perspective. Now, there are also expressions. The worst page of European history, pages of European history were written at home. Whose home? Davis's home. I said, in the translation, u mnie, w kraju. Now, the editor says, in Europe. This is the external point of view once again. Then there is register, not to worry, I say nie ma sprawy. which is the colloquial equivalent, showing Davis's point of view. Now, she says it has no importance. It is not significant. Right? Now, there is another thing now. His grasp of nationality question was feeble, says. Now, the youth today, and I hope so young people might be willing to read it, says nie ogarnia. Cannot actually come to grips with it. Oh no, says the editor, you mustn't. You mustn't. Nie orientował się. He had no knowledge, orientation. Right? Now, in Manila, Davis comments on show-off skyscrapers, and the whole image of the town is, from his point of view, seen as a showing off little community trying to be important and all the rest of it. Now, I say szpanerskie, which is exactly that, szpanować, to show off. Oh no, says the editor, you mustn't. And it says imposing. Okay? Now, metaphor, creative, a one shot, right? And I said in red, a metaphor belongs to historical narrative, that is. Right? Now, a kaleidoscope cannot be kaleidoscope, even though the saying is there in Polish. Not like in a kaleidoscope, all the time, she says, continuous. Axiology, Britain's unwelcome reliance, unwelcome by whom? By whoever Davis thinks did not welcome this or that. Oh no. Niekorzystna, unfavorable, which is the objective assessment. Now, and also epistemological attitude, surprisingly perhaps, no, you can't. Perhaps, in Polish it's chyba. The modulant chyba means I believe it is more likely than unlikely. It's a very subjective adjective. Answer. No, probably. You have to say. Now, all those examples show the tendency to remove the narrative veil which pulls in a narrator. Okay? And there is no way telling them that this is how Davis wants to write his history. No. They say, no, this is how you want to bend the Polish norms of history writing. Hence the question, which I will not answer today, what's the relation between translation and the term which is so famous these days, transcreation? Is it a peaceful coexistence or is it a clash of cultures? Are my quarrels with my editors culturally bound? Do I stand a chance to win? Should I? Should I go on fighting? No. The consolation is that Saint Pomorski, whom I believe, because I think he's a great scholar, he says that Davis is the only English historian who has managed to influence the Poles' views of their history. Is it because what she writes, or is it because what I think he should write in Polish? Well, I don't know. As conclusion, I give you a telling quotation from one of my doctoral students' work, which I think grasps what I wanted to say. It's a two-way traffic. And therefore, I would like to repeat what I said yesterday. There is no domesticated or foreignized translations. There aren't. And it is not to be or not to be unless you apply Hamlet to the situation of the translator on the book market. Right? Now, another question would be, what do we do? I know, but I can't tell you today. What do we do if we have a British historian writing within the British tradition about the Polish history, writing in English, and what do you do if you have to translate that into Polish, which is 3 times removed? Huh? No, but that has to be left to some other occasion. Thank you very much.